Redfall. So the reviews are out and they are absolutely brutal. And I think a lot of people had a bad feeling about this game. I was hoping that Arcane could somehow bring it back and just, ultimately succeed with this endeavor. But alas, it looks like it wasn't meant to be based on the general feedback and discourse that's out there. And there were already signs that this game was going to ship underbaked. So, for example, the fact that they announced that on consoles, the game would launch with only a 30 FPS quality mode, no 60 FPS performance mode, that was already a sign that this game was underbaked and that it was kind of being rushed to launch without it being fully developed with all of its features and everything being smoothed out. But then there were questionable choices like the fact that multiplayer progression only carries over for the host, whereas all the other players participating, they only get to keep the loot, but progression-wise, they don't get any of that. And then there is the fact that even on single-player mode, the game would require an online connection. Now, the folks at Arcane have said that they're going to aim to remove this requirement, but at launch, unfortunately, the requirement is there, that it is a restriction that people are going to have to deal with until whenever it is they'll remove that. And then there's the Denuvo on PC controversy, Denuvo being a controversial DRM software that does negatively impact performance. So all of that were already negative signs, but then we look at reviews and the scores kind of speak for themselves. So on PC, we're looking at a Metascore of 62%. On Xbox Series X, slightly higher at 64%. And looking at the array of scores that are out there, there are not many that are in the green, that are in the positive range. The vast majority of reviews are sitting in the 70s and 60s, and there are quite a few that go further below into the 40s and whatnot. And those who are still reviewing the game and are doing a review in progress and don't have a score to give out yet, they're not expressing enthusiasm for this game. On the Xbox side of things, we're looking at one review that gave it a 90, but the rest, the vast majority of them, once again, are sitting in the 70s and 60s. A lot of 60s, in fact, some 50s here, and then a decent amount of 40s to bring the score down quite a bit. And once again, you look at quotes from the reviews that have not scored the game yet, and they're not particularly enthusiastic about this. And I've watched and read through a bunch of reviews, and here's the basic summary of what a lot of them criticize this game for. There is the fact that the story is pretty lacking, despite some cool lore definitely being present. Unfortunately, the way the story is presented is through these slideshow cutscenes, a lot of graphics, nothing actually fully animated in 3D. A lot of the story is told through things like text logs or glorified audio logs. Just the presentation is not really there. It feels very basic, and so it's really hard to get into. There's also false marketing elements, like the fact that the trailers for this game showed a lot of pre-rendered cutscenes that many hoped would be representative of the kinds of, narrative elements we'd see in the game in terms of presentation, but that was all just for marketing. That kind of stuff is nowhere to be found in the game. Nothing cinematic like that, and so video games is the only medium that I know where you can make marketing material that is completely irrelevant to the final product, and it's frustrating that companies still do this. And then once you delve into the gameplay, the open world is said to be empty, boring, and bland. There's not much in the way of NPCs to talk to and characters to get to know and whatnot. A lot of the design of this game is dictated by menus that you select through to take on quests. There's a lack of attention to detail and intrigue when it comes to environments and when it comes to just navigating the world. And there's also just the general lack of fun and interesting scenarios. Blandness is a word that I'm going to bring up a lot in this summary of the reviews that I've read and what generally people have been saying. Stale level and mission design, just lots of basic fetch questy stuff that ultimately results in a big action sequence where you're going to be taking down some vampire. So yeah, it's just not a whole lot of variety as far as missions go, or not a whole lot of compelling things that will draw you into these missions. And not to mention that Arcane is usually very good at giving players a lot of room for creativity when it comes to approaches. That is apparently severely lacking in Redfall, just not as many approaches or pathways or creative outlets when it comes to missions and quests and designs for these activities. And the powers and abilities that the heroes have are underwhelming, and that further limits your ability to get creative with the way you approach certain quests and missions, which is uncharacteristic of Arcane. You look at something like Dishonored and all of the interesting powers they gave you combined with the level design and how creative you could get with tackling certain assassinations or certain stealth approaches and whatnot. And it was just this really compelling playground that you could experiment in that's just nowhere near the level that you'd expect from Arcane with Redfall. And so that is highly unfortunate. And then further marring things like the multiplayer experience is that there's no public matchmaking. And so just experiencing this game in co-op and working together with people with different powers to be able to overcome challenges, that's kind of almost discouraged by the lack of public matchmaking. And then on top of that, upgrading your different skills and abilities, that stuff isn't all that compelling either. So progression is also marred. Not to mention that loot, a lot of reviews have said, is just ultimately really underwhelming, save for a couple of unique weapons here and there that are kind of cool. That aside, generally, the stuff that you are rewarded with for partaking in the game's activities, that being underwhelming makes the overall experience less rewarding. And then on top of that, the encounter design, the enemies that you fight, and the way they are laid out in the world or in levels, that stuff's really bland as well, just kind of all haphazardly stitched together. Enemies are just not that fun to fight. There's nothing really compelling or epic about many of these scenarios. The amount of content in this game is also apparently lacking. The main campaign is just surprisingly short, on top of being just really shallow narratively and gameplay-wise. It apparently just doesn't take all that long to beat the campaign. So not only do you not get a whole lot of depth out of this game, but you get a short game with not a whole lot of depth. And then there are the technical issues. Frame rate stutters are mentioned a lot. Fluctuations of frame rate. Console version is at 30 FPS, but it doesn't hit a stable 30 FPS. And so it just makes for a less than ideal experience for a shooter where precision and reactivity and reflexes and responsiveness of the game is paramount. So that kind of mars the experience, on top of visual bugs like just lots of texture pop in where textures will take quite a few seconds to load when you're bringing up anything or when you're loading into a new area, whatever it is when you're loading in. And then on top of that, the gameplay is further marred by awful AI. This was already a concern during the preview stages of the game, where quite a number of outlets mentioned that AI was really questionable, where, you know, they just kind of get stuck, they stand still at times or just kind of flail about. And so all of that carrying over to the final game means that your immersion is going to be ruined. The level of challenge is going to be completely just diminished. And the overall experience is going to be really marred. And then the overall sentiment is that the game just lacks a certain level of creativity, soul, and imagination that Arcane tends to have with their previous releases, and it's just overall an empty and underbaked feeling sandbox where you just do pretty basic things and you shoot pretty basic things. The only compliments that I've seen for this game is that there are some cool elements when it comes to like art style and some visuals here and there, environments and whatnot, and the shooting feels solid, but you know, that alone obviously can't carry a game. And so that's kind of the general sentiment out there, save for a few reviews that do give this game a positive mark and say that this game is generally fun enough for it to be passable. There's one review that calls it a masterpiece. That doesn't seem to be the sentiment that many people share. On the content creation space, there are plenty of folks who have expressed their disappointment. Greg Miller tweeted, "Redfall is a major disappointment, and that sucks." You've got Mr. Matty Play saying that Redfall is shockingly bad and serves as an eerie reminder of Fallout 76's launch date. It tosses away the fun, complexity, and interactive nature of Arcane's former titles for a lifeless world filled with more bugs than creative content. Damn. You've got ACG saying that while it has some fun gameplay moments here and there, it gets eaten away with every bug, odd design choice, boring skill, and lackluster AI and combat encounter. It never feels rewarding, resulting in a world that could be interesting if it could ever make you care. And here is Tamor from GameSpot saying that as a big Arcane liker, playing Redfall was heartbreaking. The pieces of something interesting are there, but so are signs that an ambitious idea was stripped down to something functional, and it often doesn't even manage that. It's a technical mess, and basic looter shooter design is undermined by terrible enemy AI and basically pointless gear system. Its narrative and world could have been interesting, but they both feel rushed and incomplete. Similar sentiments are shared by Destin here from IGN, who just simply tweeted, "I've played enough Redfall to tell you it's a bad game. Brain dead AI, empty world, buggy tech issues. Oof." You can see right here, there's a pattern of people kind of saying the same thing over and over again, echoing the same issues that they've had with the game. Lucy James here from Giant Bomb and GameSpot saying, "I'm a huge Arcane fan and I was excited they were trying something new, but sadly they didn't stick the landing with Redfall. A jumble of systems that never truly coalesce, wonky AI, and a lackluster story all make for something truly un-Arcane. Huge bummer." Here's another member of GameSpot, John Luke, saying, "I did not enjoy my time with Redfall. It lacks everything I love about Arcane games and replaced it with a shallow open world, pointless loot system, boring quests and story, and unfun combat. Fails to work on pretty much every level." And then beyond that, we're already starting to see Redfall getting memed for its technical issues. Here's somebody presenting this particular bug of an NPC who's kind of sliding down before his animation, his walking animation triggers again. And stuff like this would be less of a big deal if everything else about this game just absolutely rocked. But these kinds of issues just become a lot easier to point out and, for the internet make fun of when, just so much of the game is lackluster that people start focusing on these things. And so this is kind of where the discourse is at with Redfall. On OpenCritic, things aren't much better, with the review score currently sitting at 66, but the real kicker here is how many critics actually recommend this game. That's down to only a whopping 26% of people who are saying maybe get this game at launch and check it out. So a huge percentage of critics and reviewers are saying this is not one to really spend your time on. And so I get the sense that Redfall is likely going to be a huge flop. Marketing-wise, I think this game has failed tremendously. And so already this game was facing an uphill battle when it comes to sales. But with these reviews pretty much proving that a lot of people's concerns surrounding this game were valid, that it did ship underbaked, that it is ultimately just not the game we wanted from Arcane. And while their attempt to deviate into a new genre is appreciated, unfortunately, this time it just didn't work out. They couldn't pull what Guerrilla did when they shifted from the first-person shooter Killzone series all the way to this open-world adventure with Horizon. Guerrilla did that successfully. Arcane just couldn't manage to really make a looter shooter that competes with some of the greats out there. So a lot of people are just going to give this one a skip. I get the sense that this is going to be a commercial flop, and this is not a good look for Xbox, because keep in mind that Xbox promoted Redfall as one of their flagship games essentially coming out this year. It was their big closer for one of their presentations last year, and so, this was supposed to kick off Xbox's currently lackluster library of games. We do have Starfield to look forward to, but that's been delayed a couple times now, so now there are concerns surrounding that. But hopefully Bethesda Game Studios will be able to knock that out of the park, because the current state of Xbox's library, as far as first-party stuff is concerned, it's sad right now. Nowhere near what Sony has been able to do with PlayStation 5. And I don't know why on God's green earth they launched Redfall in this state. Just from the fact that they launched with only a 30 FPS mode, that alone made it apparent that this game clearly needed a delay. But just from a content standpoint, from a substance standpoint, from a depth standpoint, clearly this game just needed a lot more cooking. Or maybe there were some grand ideas that they had to scale back on because they had to get this game out. Whatever the case, clearly things just didn't go quite right with this game. And it sucks because Arcane, they've made some games that a lot of people really appreciate. And I think there's some great creative minds there. With Redfall, I feel like they fell into something really generic because looter shooters are the thing to pursue because, it can potentially make a lot of money if a lot of people happen to come in and play it and whatever. But, with Arcane, I really hope they go back to making games that adhere to their strengths, because Redfall clearly ain't it, based on, a lot of feedback out there from a lot of prominent figures that have essentially proven people's concerns right. And Xbox really needs to start stepping it up when it comes to the quality assurance of their game releases, because, the way Redfall launched and the fact that overall it's just not that good of a game is definitely going to put a damper on people's motivations to get an Xbox. You know, it's just not going to make that console compelling if, you know, games like these keep releasing as far as first-party titles are concerned. So, you know, a lot is riding on Starfield coming out later this year. But yeah, you get the idea. I could sit here and read the summaries of these reviews, but a significant majority of them pretty much echo what I've already highlighted. And PC performance-wise, apparently on PC, Redfall performs awfully on PC as well. It's not just on consoles. I'm sure on PC it's possible to achieve 60 frames per second, but it's likely not all that stable, further highlighting that this game needed more time in the oven. Same thing with the Xbox version here. Some positive ones here and there saying that there's enough a fun factor here to elevate it enough to keep people interested. That seems to be a minority of opinions, so I get the sense that generally the reviews sitting in the 70s, 60s, and even 40s and 50s are a more accurate representation of what a lot of people might experience. So, this is a big L, it would seem, for Arcane, for Bethesda, the publisher, and for Xbox, the head of now Bethesda. So that's really, really unfortunate. I really was rooting for this game. I was hoping that all of my pessimism surrounding this game were wrong, but the second I started to see the signs, I just knew something felt off and that there was a big possibility that something like this might happen. And alas, unfortunately, in this case, my pessimisms were proven right. I hate it when that happens, but, you know, sometimes you can kind of read the writing on the wall, and with Redfall, the writing apparently was pretty clear, and the results, unfortunately, speak for themselves. But yeah, there you have it, folks. The short of it is that Redfall seems to be a really hard game to recommend. If you have a limited amount of money to spend on a game, Redfall's probably not the one that you want to spend it on right now while it's on full price. Maybe down the line, I don't know, rent it or get it on a big sale. But, you know, spend your $60, $70 elsewhere. Redfall just really doesn't meet the Arcane standards that we have come to know and love. And that's everything you need to know, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. For more games, news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.